Hello, this is Christine Deal, and I'm going to go over Chapter 10 in your text that covers mental health. This is a relatively quick chapter. We're going to start with the learning outcomes for the chapter. It's a relatively short chapter, and so there are 5 learning outcomes that include define the global burden of disease related to mental disorders, apply the National Academy of Medicine framework related to prevention of mental health disorders, define the difference among behavioral, biological, environmental, and socioeconomic risk factors related to mental health disorders, and to apply current evidence-based population-level interventions to the prevention of the disorders and promotion of optimal mental health for communities and populations, and to be able to describe systemic approaches to the promotion of mental health and the prevention and treatment of mental health disorders. So this is going to be a brief overview of the chapter. It's a pretty straightforward chapter, so I'm just going to go over some of the high points and main concepts with these PowerPoints. So your book identifies mental health as a state of successful performance of mental function resulting in productive activities, fulfilling relationships with other people, and the ability to adapt to change and cope with challenges. Mental disorders are diagnosable disorders that negatively affect the mental health of individuals and affect an individual's ability to cope with everyday life. So behavioral health and mental health, there are 4 topics related directly to behavioral health, which include substance use, tobacco, injury, and violence. And those are discussed individually in a separate chapter. So this chapter only focuses on mental health and mental health disorders. Neuropsychiatric disorders are the leading cause of disability in the United States. So mental health does not merely represent the absence of a mental disorder. Okay, it's the cognitive and emotional ability to deal with the ups and downs of life while contributing to society through work and play, while also having a diagnosed disorder. Okay, so the health of the population reflects the physical well-being of the members of the population or community, and also their social and emotional well-being. So the state of emotional well-being and successful performance involves the ability to cope, ability to form and maintain healthy relationships, and the ability to adapt to change. So mental illness is a term that refers to all mental health disorders collectively. They're often used interchangeably with disorders. Mental health disorders are diagnosable disorders, such as bipolar and OCD and borderline personality disorder, that has specific clusters of signs and symptoms associated with them. Mental health disorders vary from mild to severe. So any mental illness is defined as a mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder with varying degrees of severity. So the promotion of optimal mental health requires the delivery of interventions focused on behavioral change and the availability of adequate systems for care of those with mental health disorders. Promotion of mental health at the population and community level requires an environment that encourages strong social networks, which involves a safe place to work and live. And the burden of disease is discussed in Chapter 9, but that is, the burden of disease is measured in years of life lost related to ill health. And in 2012, the World Health Organization issued a resolution on mental health with the goal of reducing the global burden of mental disorders and improve the overall mental health of countries. Okay, so less years lost of life due to mental illness or mental disorder is the goal. So the World Health Organization resolution is a comprehensive, coordinated response to address mental disorders and health, and it includes programs to reduce stigma and discrimination, to reintegrate patients into workplace and society, and to provide support for care providers and families, and to invest in mental health from the health budget. So globally, it is estimated that 1 billion people have a mental health disorder, and in the United States, an estimated 25% of adults are reported having mental disorders within the previous year, which is probably, my guess is understated with the pandemic being in the last year and a half. My guess is that it's much higher than that with recent events. The CDC compiles data from 8 surveillance systems on mental health, and by using these systems, the systems may not focus specifically on mental health, but they certainly include indicators of mental health and mental health disorders. So the 12-month prevalence is a measure that estimates the occurrence of a disorder within 1 year prior to assessment. So mental health disorders are most prevalent in those aged 18 to 44. They are higher in females than in males. It could just be because females are more likely to seek help and to answer surveys regarding mental health, and more open with their mental health concerns than males. Those reporting 2 or more races had the highest prevalence of serious mental illness, and almost 50% of teens diagnosed with any mental illness is what was found. That's really alarming. So the World Health Organization has developed the World Mental Health Survey to help determine estimates of human capital cost and the prevalence of mental disorders in a wide range of countries. Major depressive disorder is estimated to, as of 2016, 3.1 million in the U.S., 3.1 million teens, and 16.2 million adults had at least one episode of major depressive disorder as of the data in 2016. And for serious mental illness, persons diagnosed with a serious mental illness died 10 to 20 years earlier than the general population, due to suicide and substance abuse, and also being less likely to receive treatment for comorbidities and less likely to adhere to treatment. And so that goes along with the burden of disease that was on the previous 2 slides previous. So this diagram is in your book. It's on page 242. I'll just have you take a look at that. Risk factors that exist for mental health disorders, nature and nurture both contribute. Certainly there is a genetic component to many mental health disorders such as bipolar and schizophrenia, but there is also an environmental factor involved that includes the family, environment, and also individual behavior. The community is also part of that environmental component to mental health, socioeconomic factors, the environment of the community, and then the education and job opportunities that are available where they live. So there is an interplay among the individual, the family, and the community environment. So improving the mental health of a population requires taking all of these factors into account when developing interventions. So family history of mental disorders, or history of being diagnosed with a mental disorder. Okay, that's the genetic history. Traumatic events, that's the personal history. Having military combat, assault, or witness to a violent crime are examples. And also, then there's in utero exposure, which is another considered to be an epigenetic or an environmental contributor to mental health. So in utero exposure to viruses and toxins and poor nutrition. And then cerebral injury, experiencing brain damage as a result of a serious injury, such as a blow to the head. Stressful life situations, which include financial problems, the death of a loved one, marital problems, or divorce. Social isolation is also a risk factor, contributing to mental health disorders, developmental delays, substance use, and then poor health, living with chronic mental condition and having comorbidities. Certainly history of being abused or neglected as a child, social isolation, being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning plus, adolescents are at higher risk for mental illness and mental disorders, poverty and socioeconomic level, rural versus urban populations, lower education level, and then dangerous communities with high crime rates. Certainly, certain conditions physiologically affect brain chemistry, such as hormonal imbalances, and as I've mentioned, exposure in utero to viruses or toxins. And also, physical harm, traumatic brain injury changes the physiology of the brain, for example, which contributes to the mental health or mental illness risk. Malnutrition or low birth weight, and then we also have to consider side effects to medication. It's interesting to note that children of parents with mental disorders are at increased risk as well, not just from hereditability, because there is a genetic link with some disorders, but also because of the negative impact that a mental disorder has on parenting skills. Resilience is a protective factor. So an individual's ability to access protective factors that exist at different levels to withstand chronic stress or recover from traumatic events are demonstrated by social competence of an individual, problem-solving ability of the individual, autonomy, and having a sense of purpose. So those are all factors that build resilience, which improves their coping mechanisms and ability to adapt to change. Protective factors are the processes within individuals, families, or communities that exist, can be strengthened, or can be incorporated into interventions for the purpose of building resilience. So ways to build resilience is to create an environment that enhances community capacity for well-being. For example, programs that create school connectedness. Having community resources that are important for human development. Proper health care, local health care, child care, education, employment, recreation, having programs that foster healthy parent-child interactions and increase parental social support. The single most common factor for children who build resilience is at least having one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. That's really important, and it would be very important to ask in an assessment, is there anybody in your life that you have a stable and committed, trustworthy relationship that you can talk to? Community capacity refers to the ability of a community to build resilience with proper assets for mental wellness. Individual resilience, there's a focus on strength building approach. So strengths are recognized in resilience are inherent psychological needs. So humans are compelled to meet their psychological needs throughout their lifetime. And factors that determine whether they do meet them are often dependent on the wider systems in which an individual interacts, including families, schools, communities. On a cellular to global level, the interaction among an individual's genetics, which would be the cellular level, epigenetics, which is how the environment affects the gene expression, and the larger environment, other contributors such as stress, economic area in which they live, predict much of what we know about mental well-being. Access to food, access to health care. Public health interventions to promote mental wellness, to promote mental wellness must address all levels of the continuum from the cellular level to the global level. So from utero to old age. Cultural beliefs do determine if support is available and whether a person with a mental health disorder will even seek or accept treatment. So it's important to understand the cultural beliefs of our patients and the community, and certainly the influence of societal factors often goes ignored, but it cannot be ignored. People are often unwilling to speak up due to their culture if they have a mental illness concern. So every culture has its own way of making sense of the highly subjective experience that is an understanding of one's mental health. Of course, a lot of that has to do with stigma, which is we all are aware of the stigma that goes with mental health. There are characteristics, societal stereotypes that are viewed as unacceptable, and individuals with mental illness may adopt behaviors that protect them from stigma, but may also result in failure to seek treatment, and that is a serious concern. So we have to work to decrease the stigma of mental health. Behaviors associated with the stigma, so the stigma that is around contributes to individuals not telling other people about any symptoms they're having, contributes to them masking their symptoms, normalizing their mental health symptoms, emphasizing somatic aspects instead, like a headache or a stomach ache. Refusing to seek treatment is often related to the stigma, the fear of the stigma, and fearing rejection by family and friends, and also concern about difficulty finding housing and employment if they've got a mental health record, so to say, and being socially ostracized is a big fear, and is a behavior associated with stigma. So prevention of mental disorders involves early detection, intervention, and treatment. Promotion would be building supportive communities, having adequate living conditions, and a compassionate environment that is supportive of mental health. Universal prevention are interventions for the entire population, not just those at risk. Okay. Selective prevention are for subgroups known to be at high risk, and indicated levels of prevention are for subgroups who are at the very highest risk for mental disorders. Okay, there are those who clearly demonstrate signs of mental disorders. The World Health Organization supports strategies that will create healthful living conditions and environments to result in optimal mental health, and focus on specific age groups, vulnerable populations, and women. It's important to engage more than one sector of society and include those having a shared interest: governmental agencies, citizen groups, nonprofit groups, and businesses. So secondary prevention would involve screening for mental disorders, so screening for depression, anxiety, and trauma disorders. The acronym SBIRT stands for screening, brief intervention, and referral for treatment. Screening tools include the following, okay, and you can look those up and see what kind of screening questions are on those. Don't think they have a copy. Nope, they don't have a copy of those in your chapter of what these questions are. Tertiary treatment, where they have to meet clinical guidelines for diagnosis and treatment with the DSMV, okay, which is a diagnosis based on underlying vulnerabilities as well as symptom characteristics. So treatment and policy are closely linked, and access to treatment is a pivotal goal. Policy and treatment. Policies help strengthen mental health treatment. Prevention requires reduction of disparity, and less disparity enables easier access to treatment. Deinstitutionalization was a shift of treatment from the institution to the community, which happened in the 1970s. So that was a shift in mental health treatment at that time. So trans-institutionalization occurred. Mentally ill persons ended up being on the streets, in jails and prisons, in nursing homes and boarding houses, and in homeless shelters. And today it is estimated that between 30% and 50% of people in the United States who are homeless are also mentally ill. So the deinstitutionalization that occurred in the 70s switched the focus of care from health centers that provide comprehensive services to the community. And deinstitutionalization occurred faster than the community adjustment to providing outpatient care. Okay, so practice, question, or test your knowledge. Screening for mental conditions such as depression, anxiety, and trauma is considered which type of prevention, or which of the following? And that would be secondary prevention. And then here it identifies the difference between primary prevention, comes prior to the disease, okay, therefore preventing it from occurring. Screening is done as a means of detecting those who are ill in a population, and then that would be secondary. Anything screening is a secondary prevention. Tertiary prevention is the delivery of treatment to those diagnosed with a disease or disorder, okay? So they've already had the diagnosis, there's no screening that's being done, it's tertiary, now they've got the diagnosis and now they need that kind of specialized, individualized care. And then surveillance is conducted to determine the incidence or prevalence of a disease or disorder in a population. So secondary is the screening. Okay, so practice question or test your knowledge number 2. Community level risk factors for mental health disorders do not include socioeconomic factors, genetic factors, the environment, or the education and job opportunities. Give you a couple minutes to think about that one, and the answer is 2. Okay, so there are genetic factors. Okay, genetic factors are not community level risk factors. They're at the individual level. So community level factors, remember, include the community environment, the socioeconomic makeup of the community, and education and job opportunities available to members of that community. So this concludes Chapter 10 on mental health. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions. Have a great day.